Have you ever felt like leaving immediately, even though you couldn't explain why? This is the place for real 4chan stories, told by people who found themselves stuck in moments like that. The story ahead takes that uneasy feeling and slowly gives it a reason to exist. Make yourself comfortable, dim the room, and don't forget to subscribe. All right, let's start. The logbook at the station has a column for weather and a column for visitors. In January, that visitors column is supposed to be empty for the whole month. Mine wasn't. I was 12 days into a winter shift on Matinicus Rock, about 20 miles out from Rockland. The regular ferry stops running in November. In good weather, the lobster boats still come out to the island proper, but not to the rock, and definitely not in a January like that one. We'd had 3 storms in 10 days. The last one packed the door with ice up to my knee, and I had to chip it out with a claw hammer to get outside. So I wasn't looking for company. I was looking at the horizon, because that's what you do out there. You check the light, you check the fog signal, you eat, you read, you check the light again. The Coast Guard automated the station years ago, but they still pay a caretaker to sit through the winter, mostly for insurance reasons, and because the equipment there is old and someone needs to babysit it. It's a good job for a certain kind of person. I am that kind of person, or I was. Morning of the 12th. I came down from the lantern room with a mug of instant coffee and looked out the east window on my way to the kitchen. There was a boat at the landing, not a lobster boat, not the Coast Guard tender, a small, open runabout, maybe 18 feet, white with a blue stripe, the kind of thing you'd rent on a lake in July. It was tied off badly to the iron ring and already grinding against the concrete every time a swell came through. I stood there with the coffee in my hand and watched it grind. Then I looked up the path and saw him. He was already halfway to the door. Jeans, a dark, quilted jacket, not a shell, the kind you'd wear to walk to a bar. Sneakers, no gloves, no pack. He was carrying a plastic grocery bag in one hand. He waved. I opened the door before he knocked, because if I didn't, he was going to freeze standing there. Wind chill that morning was somewhere south of 0. His face was already the color of raw pork. "Hey," he said. "Sorry, man. I know this is weird." I said something like, "Are you okay? What happened? Are you alone?" He nodded to all of it, in a tired way, like I was asking too many questions at once. He said his name was Cal. Just Cal. I got him inside, sat him on the bench by the radiator, and got him a towel and a dry pair of wool socks out of my own bag. His feet, when he pulled the sneakers off, were white and waxy at the toes. He didn't seem to notice. "I just needed to get out of the city," he said. "I know how that sounds." He said it like a joke, and I laughed a little, because you laugh a little when someone gives you a line like that, and you don't know what else to do. He didn't say which city. I didn't push. I put water on for tea and stood at the counter with my back to him, and I kept catching myself listening for what he was doing behind me, which was nothing. He was just sitting. I tried to call it in. The station has a VHF, and it works, but that morning I got nothing but the automatic weather loop out of Portland when I switched channels. I told him I was going to hail the Coast Guard about his boat, and he said, "Yeah, whatever you need to do." Very relaxed about it, almost polite. The radio didn't want to raise anyone. The antenna might have been iced. I'd been up there the day before and it looked fine, but weather does what it does. I told him I'd try again in a couple hours. He asked if he could stay the night. He said the swell was too big for the runabout in the dark and he wasn't a good enough boater to run back before it got worse. Both of those things were true. I could see the swell from the window, and anyone who tied off like he did was not going to make Rockland after sunset in January. I said yes. What was I going to do? Put him back on the water? I gave him the spare bunk in the second room, fed him canned chili and crackers. He ate slowly and thanked me twice for each thing, in that careful way people talk when they're trying not to slur. He wasn't drunk. He was just very careful with his words. He asked me about the light, what ran it, how often the guard came out, whether anyone else was on the rock. He asked about family on the mainland. He asked what my schedule was, what time I usually went to sleep. Later, those questions sounded like what they were. Sitting across the table from him with a bowl of chili between us, They sounded like a guy trying to keep a conversation going because the silence was worse. I answered all of them. I told him my rotation, my usual bedtime, that I lived alone. I told him nobody was going to come check on us because nobody could. Around 9, I said I was turning in. He nodded and said he'd probably read for a while. I gave him a paperback off the shelf, something about a shipwreck. He said thanks. My bedroom is on the second floor at the north end. The bunk I gave him is on the same floor, other side of the stairs, about 20 feet down the hall. Between our rooms there's the bathroom and a linen closet. That's it. The door to my room doesn't lock. There's no reason for it to lock. There had never been a reason for it to lock. I fell asleep faster than I should have. The wind was hard against the window, and the light was doing its slow sweep. And I remember thinking that if I were him, I'd be terrified of the sound the wind was making, which is a sound you get used to only after a couple of seasons out there. I woke up sometime after 2. I know it was after 2 because I'd checked my watch when I got up to piss around 1:30, and everything had been quiet then. What woke me the second time wasn't a sound. It was that feeling you get when a room isn't empty anymore. Anyone who's lived alone long enough knows it. I didn't sit up. Something in me, and I'm grateful for it, kept me flat on my back with my eyes almost closed. Through my lashes, in the strip of gray that came in through the window with each pass of the light, I could see him. He was standing next to the bed, on my right side, close enough that if I'd rolled over, I'd have put my face against his stomach. He wasn't moving. His arms were at his sides. He was looking down at me. The light passed, and I saw his face for maybe half a second, and then it was dark again, and then the light passed, and I saw it again. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing anything with his mouth. He was just looking. I want to say I thought a lot of things in that moment. I didn't. My whole body went into one decision, which was to keep breathing the way a sleeping person breathes. Slow in, slow out. Mouth open a little. Don't swallow. Don't move your eyes. I don't know how long he stood there. I want to say 20 minutes, but memory does what it wants with time. It was long enough that my right arm went numb where it was pinned under my hip. It was long enough that the light passed 30 or 40 times, and every single pass he was still looking. At some point, he leaned down. Not far, maybe a foot closer. I could smell him then. Sweat and the wet wool smell of the jacket he must have still been wearing, and something under it, sweeter, that I don't want to name because I'm not sure I remember it right. Then he straightened up and walked out. He didn't creep. He walked normally, like a man leaving a room. I heard his socks on the boards down the hall. I heard the door of his bunk room close. Not hard, just closed. I did not move for a long time after that. I lay there and listened to the wind and the light, and I told myself the door would open again in a minute, and when it didn't, I told myself it would open in another minute. It didn't. Eventually, the window went from black to the dirty gray you get before real sunrise, and I sat up. I was not brave. I did not go for the flare gun in the office, which is where I should have gone. I did not do anything except try to get through until it was light. I went downstairs at 6. He came down at 6:30, in his own clothes, hair wet like he'd washed his face. He asked if there was any of that chili left. I said no, but I could do eggs. He said eggs would be great. We ate eggs. He talked about the boat, about how the water looked calmer, about how he really appreciated me putting him up. He was warm. He was funny. He asked if I ever got lonely out there, and I said sometimes, and he said he could see that. He left at 8. I watched him from the window the whole way down to the landing. He untied the runabout, got in, started it on the second try, and pointed the bow west toward Rockland. He gave me a small wave without looking back. I got the VHF to work an hour later. I told them I'd had an unscheduled visitor, described the boat, described him. I said he had made me nervous and I couldn't say why. The officer on the other end got very quiet and asked me to repeat the description. They picked him up at the dock in Rockland that afternoon. There was a warrant out of a county I won't name here for an assault a woman had reported 10 days earlier. He'd left the coast in a boat he didn't own. He hadn't been trying to visit anyone. He'd been running out of places on the map. I finished my rotation, 3 more weeks. I slept with a chair pushed under the door handle every night, which I understand does almost nothing, but it made a sound I would have heard. I still take winter shifts. I don't put anyone up anymore. If a boat comes in, I hail the Coast Guard first and talk to the person from the second floor window with the door locked below me. The thing I go back to isn't the standing. It's that he leaned down. I don't know what he was doing when he leaned down. I've thought about it more than I should. I think he was checking whether I was really asleep. I think he decided I was. I run a private tattoo studio in a converted garage behind a house I rent in East Austin, off Cesar Chavez. No walk-ins, no signage, appointment only through Instagram DMs. I've been doing this for 6 years, and about a third of my clients I've never met outside the chair. That's normal in this business. You get used to strangers taking their shirt off and telling you nothing about themselves. The guy started coming in October 2020. Referral from a bartender I used to date. He booked through a text with no photo, no name attached, just a number I later saved as Tuesday Guy, because that's when he always wanted his slot. Second Tuesday of every month, 8 p.m., the last appointment of the day. First session, he brought a folded piece of printer paper. On it, in careful block letters, a woman's name and 2 dates separated by a dash. That was it. No font reference, no size, no placement. He pointed at his left forearm, near the wrist, and said, "Small, clean, black." Those were the only words he said the whole 2 hours. He paid cash, $200, plus a 50 tip, folded flat. No card, no Venmo, no small talk about the weather or the Longhorns or anything. He nodded once at the door and left. I didn't think much of it. Memorial tattoos are common. Grandma, dog, best friend who OD'd, whatever. People deal with grief in whatever way they can. And my job is to make it look decent and not ask questions. He came back the next month, same time. New name, new pair of dates, same forearm. An inch below the last one. Paid the same way. By month 5, I had a nickname for him in my calendar, and a running joke with myself that he was building a memorial wall on his own skin. By month 10, I'd moved to his right forearm because the left was full. By month 16, I was working on his ribs. I want to be honest about something. I noticed things. I just didn't let myself notice them. Every name was a woman. First names only, no last names. The dates were always 2, always with the second one falling in the last 4 or 5 years. The gap between the dates varied, sometimes decades, sometimes not even a full year. I remember one that read 2003 to 2004, and I remember pausing for maybe half a second before I inked it, because that's an infant, or close to it. And then I told myself I had no idea what I was looking at, and it wasn't my business. He never flinched. Not on the ribs, not on the sternum, not the one time we did the inside of his bicep, which people usually cuss through. He just sat there and watched the needle like he was watching a leak in a ceiling. The thing that finally got me wasn't the names. It was the repetition of the dates. I keep a paper log for private clients, old habit from when I worked out of a chair share. Just a spiral notebook where I write the date of the session, what we did, and what they paid. In March 2022, I flipped back through it to find a reference for a different client, and my eye caught on his entries because I'd started writing the tattoo content in shorthand. F name 88 to 11, F name 74 to 19, like that. Some of the year pairs were showing up twice. I sat with the notebook open on my thigh for a long time. Then I got up and went to the desk and pulled every entry I had on him into a list on my laptop. 31 sessions, 31 names. When I sorted them by the second date, I had 6 duplicates. 2 women who both died in 2017, 3 in 2019, then a cluster in 2020. I still didn't want to be the person I was about to be. I picked one. A name I'll keep to myself, and a pair of dates in the late 90s to 2018. I typed the first name, the second date, and the word Austin into Google. I didn't get anything on the first page, so I took Austin out and added Texas. The second result was a funeral home page. Photo of a young woman, dates matching mine exactly, first name matching. Survived by her mother and a younger brother. Cause of death not listed. I stared at the screen and my mouth got very dry. I picked another. This one I remembered clearly because the tattoo was on his left rib cage and he'd asked me to do it slightly bigger than the others, which was the only time he'd ever specified size. Same process. Name, second date, Texas. Third result down, a small town paper out near Corpus, an article about a woman found in her apartment. The dates lined up. I did 2 more after that. Same result. One in Houston, one across the state line in Shreveport, which surprised me because I'd assumed everything would be Texas. 4 for 4. I want to describe what my studio felt like right then, because it's the part I keep coming back to. The overhead is a single warm bulb and 2 clip-on lamps at the chair. The AC was rattling because I hadn't changed the filter, and I remember the sound of it kicking on and off while I sat there. There's a poster on the wall opposite the chair, an old Willie Nelson concert print I bought at a garage sale, and I remember looking at Willie's face and feeling stupid, like I was in a room I shouldn't be in and everyone but me had known for months. His next appointment was in 9 days. I didn't call the cops right away because I didn't know what I had. Some pairs of numbers on a man's arms. A guy who paid cash and didn't talk. Nothing on him that would even pass for a description in a police report. He wore a cap every visit. No visible tattoos above the collar. No scars. No accent I could place. Average height. Brown hair going gray at the temples. Could have been 40. Could have been 55. What I did do was sit down at my kitchen table with a beer I didn't drink and think through it like a job. I needed the tattoos themselves, all of them, photographed clearly enough that you could read the names and the dates. And I needed to do it without him knowing. The cover was easy. I texted him 2 days before his session and told him I was updating my private portfolio for insurance purposes, and if he was okay with it, I'd like to photograph the pieces we'd done together, faces cropped, just the work. I said I understood if you'd rather not. I sweated over the phone for an hour after I sent it. He replied with 1 word, 20 minutes later, fine. He showed up at 8 on the dot. Same cap, same denim jacket, same silence. I had the camera on a tripod already set up, and I'd angled the chair so the light would hit clean on both arms and his torso. I told him I'd start with the sleeves and work down, and he took the jacket off and rolled up both sleeves without a word, and then unbuttoned his shirt when I asked, and sat there while I moved around him and clicked. I shot every piece. I zoomed in and I shot each one twice. He looked at the ceiling the whole time. Then I did the new tattoo he'd come in for. Another name, another pair of dates. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I've done a lot of drunk clients and nervous clients, and I know what my hand feels like when I'm holding it together on the outside. This felt like that. He paid, tipped the 50, and left at 10:10. I locked the door and pulled the shades and sat on the floor with my back against the chair for a while. Then I loaded the photos onto my laptop and I zipped them and I opened the FBI's online tip form, and I typed for about 40 minutes. I listed every name I could read off the pictures, every pair of dates. The 4 I'd already matched to real women, and I attached the zip. I put my number in and my email. I hit send. It was almost 1 a.m. The next morning, I put a printed sign on the studio door that said, temporarily closed for repairs, and a mailing address for anyone with a deposit. I called the 2 clients I had booked that week and moved them out a month. I told my landlord I'd be traveling. I stayed with a friend in Dripping Springs for 3 weeks, and I did not touch the studio. On the second Tuesday of April, I drove past the house at 8:15 p.m. with my headlights off, parked half a block down, and watched from the driver's seat. He was there, standing at the studio door with his back to the street. He tried the handle twice. He stood there for maybe 4 minutes, not moving, hands in his jacket pockets. Then he turned and walked to a dark sedan parked across the street, got in and drove off. I couldn't get the plate. My hands were shaking too badly to raise the phone in time. I never saw him again. I got 1 call from a number I didn't recognize in early May that went to voicemail with no message. I got a follow-up email from an agent about 6 weeks after the tip, asking for a phone interview. I did it. He asked me a lot of questions and answered almost none of mine. At the end, he said, "Thank you for reaching out," and told me he couldn't discuss any active matter. I reopened the studio in June, under a different Instagram handle, appointment only, referrals only, and I started keeping the log on a laptop instead of paper. I still have the notebook. I don't open it. Sometimes, on the second Tuesday of the month around 8, I catch myself listening for a car door. The thing that gets you about night shift at a dam is how much you rely on hearing. Not the fancy stuff, the 1/10 of an inch sensor readings, the SCADA screens, just your ears. You sit there long enough, you know what the building is supposed to sound like at 2 a.m. in August. You know the hum of the HVAC in the control room, the way the concrete creaks when the water heats up during the day and cools at night. You know when the gates move because you told them to. That's the part that stuck with me. I've been running the overnight console at a reservoir in Central Virginia for 6 years. Won't say which one. The site sits in a fold of hills about 90 minutes west of Richmond, and the control building is a squat cinder block thing that looks more like a rural post office than infrastructure. Inside, it's 2 operator stations, a wall of screens, and a bathroom that hasn't been remodeled since Clinton was in office. Coffee machine that takes quarters, the whole 9 yards. August 12th, 2022. It was hot in a way that Virginia summers get when there hasn't been rain in a while. Cicadas so loud you could hear them through the ventilation duct. My shift starts at 2200. Standard handoff from the evening guy, whose name I'll leave out of this. He'd logged a routine maintenance ping earlier, nothing else. I signed on, ran my checks, poured coffee, opened up the log to start my shift. Around 01:30, I heard the first one. If you've never been in a dam control building, the gates make a very particular sound when they move. It's not loud, not from inside. It's a low hydraulic pulse, followed by a kind of long metallic groan that travels up through the concrete floor. Your feet feel it before your ears do. You don't confuse it with anything else, because nothing else in the building sounds like that. I heard it, and my first thought was that I must have absent-mindedly clicked something. That happens. Fatigue, a fly on the trackpad, whatever. I looked at my screen. Nothing had been touched in the last 40 minutes. The gate positions on the schematic all read closed. The activity log was quiet. Last entry was my own login at 21:58. I looked at the physical indicator panel on the wall. This is an old school analog thing they kept when they upgraded the software back in 2016. Little bar lights that show real gate position based on mechanical feedback from the spillway, independent from the SCADA system entirely. Gate 3 was showing a partial open, maybe 8 inches. I sat there for a second and just stared at it, because on my screen, on the software, Gate 3 was flush closed like the other 5. Okay, I've been in this job long enough to know the drill. Analog panel disagreeing with the software usually means a bad sensor on one of the 2, and you call it in and let daytime figure it out. I picked up the desk phone to page the engineer on call, and then I put it back down, because I'd heard the gate. I'd felt it. Whatever else was true, Gate 3 had physically moved, and the software had not recorded a command. I ran a manual query on the log. Filtered for the last hour. Nothing. Filtered for the last 6 hours. Nothing but my sign-on. I pulled the raw command history from the back end. The stuff that shouldn't be filterable at all. Same thing. Empty. I got up and walked outside. The air was thick, that heavy river air you get near the impoundment in summer. You could smell the algae from the reservoir side. I walked down the service path with a flashlight to where I could actually see the spillway. My beam wasn't strong enough to catch Gate 3 from that angle, but I could hear the water. Something was moving through it, not a lot. A steady, thin rush where there shouldn't have been any at all. I stood there maybe 2 minutes, listening. Somewhere across the reservoir, a truck was crossing the bridge. Otherwise, it was just the water and the frogs. I wanted the sound to stop. It didn't. I went back inside. My hands were dry, but my shirt was stuck to my back. I sat down and pulled up Gate 3 on the software again. I clicked to close it manually, expecting the system to tell me the gate was already closed. Instead, I got the little confirmation animation, the arrow that shows a command being sent. The analog panel updated. The bar light went dark. The groan came up through the floor again, longer this time. When it was done, Gate 3 read closed on both systems. The activity log now showed my close command, time-stamped, clean, as if that was the only thing that had happened. I want to be clear about something. I did not panic. That's not because I'm brave. It's because when you work overnight infrastructure for 6 years, panic gets replaced with procedure. Procedure is the thing that lets you keep your hands steady. I did what the binder tells you to do when the software and the analog disagree in any direction. I switched the gate array to manual lockout. That means the software cannot send commands to the actuators anymore, period. Any movement has to be initiated by physical key at the spillway itself, and the key was on my belt. Then I called the engineer on call. His name was Rob. He'd been doing this longer than I had. I gave him the summary, and I heard him go quiet on the other end of the phone. He asked me twice if I was sure the analog panel had shown movement. I said yes both times. He asked if I'd touched anything else. I said no. He said, "Stay on lockout. I'm coming in. Don't sign off when your shift ends. I want you there when I get there." I sat in that control room until 700. I didn't touch the console. I watched the analog panel like it was a live animal. About every 20 minutes, I got up and walked over to it and put my hand flat against the plastic housing, like an idiot, like I could feel through it whether it was telling the truth. I'd been trained on this equipment. I had never done that before in my life. Nothing moved. The gates stayed closed. The building settled into its 4 a.m. quiet, and then its 5 a.m. birds, and then the shift change hum of the day guy pulling into the lot. Rob showed up about 20 minutes after that. He brought 2 people I didn't recognize, not the usual daytime engineers. One was a woman in her 40s with a laptop bag. The other was a younger guy in a polo with no logo on it. They didn't introduce themselves beyond first names, and even those felt made up to me. Rob told me to walk them through what happened, so I did, exactly as I'm telling it now. The woman spent about 6 hours with our system. I wasn't allowed to watch what she was doing, but I could see the screens reflected in the window of the break room when I went to get water. She wasn't looking at our normal interface. She was in something underneath it, black background, white text scrolling too fast to read. Around 3 in the afternoon, Rob pulled me aside on the service path outside. He said they'd found something. He didn't want to say what on site. He said someone from a different office would come talk to me later that week, and that until then, I shouldn't discuss any of this with the day guys, my family, nobody. He said, "You did the right thing going to manual. If you hadn't, we'd be having a very different conversation right now." I asked him what he meant by that. He looked at me for a long second and said, "The other gates were in the queue." 2 days later, a man in a plain suit met me at a diner off Route 29. He didn't order anything. He waited until the waitress was 3 tables away before he opened his folder. He had a laptop and about a dozen questions, all of which I answered honestly. He explained, in language I'm not going to repeat here, that something had been sitting inside our control system for a while. Not a virus in the way you think about a virus, something purpose-built. It was designed to wake up when specific conditions were met, do a small sequence of things, and go back to sleep, without writing anything to the log the operators could see. What I heard that night was, in his words, a test pass. A very small one, a calibration. He told me the code was not the kind of thing a person or a small group makes. He said the word actor a lot, and never once said hacker. He said the case was being handled by people whose office I would not be able to look up. He put a document in front of me. I signed it. I'm not going to tell you what was in it beyond the obvious, which is that a lot of what happened that summer I cannot describe in any more detail than I already have. I still work overnight, different site now, different state. I run my checks a little differently than the binder tells me to. I trust the analog panel before I trust the screen. every time, without thinking about it. If they disagree, the screen is the one lying. The part I keep coming back to isn't the gate that moved. It's the fact that the log was clean. Somebody, somewhere, wanted our records to say nothing had happened. And for about 4 hours on a hot Friday night in August, they almost got their wish. That's today's episode wrapped, everyone. Comment which story you'd rate as the creepiest, and hit like if you want more. We keep digging through 4chan because sometimes the most unsettling posts are the ones that feel like they were written by someone living a completely ordinary life, until, suddenly, they weren't. Keep your doors locked, and I'll see you in the next video.